It's late August, and there's just the tiniest hint of fall in the air. It's my favorite time to be outside enjoying nature. The warm sun and the cool breeze, birds singing, and that indescribable smell of late summer. I'm Pat Tully of the Ketchikan Public Library, and this is Reading Aloud. This evening I'm reading two pieces about late summer by Bradford Torrey. Torrey was an ornithologist who wrote a weekly column in the Boston Evening Transcript in the late 1890s. These were collected and published under the title Clerk of the Woods in 1900 with this beautiful cover. So the first piece is entitled Popular Woodpeckers. There are two birds in Newton this present summer that have perhaps attracted more attention than any pair of Massachusetts birds ever attracted before, or more by a good deal, I imagine, than was paid to a pair of crows that, for some inexplicable reason, built a nest and reared a brood of young a year ago in a backyard on Beacon Hill in Boston. I refer to a pair of red-headed woodpeckers that have a nest at this moment containing young birds nearly ready to fly in a tall dead stump standing on the very edge of the sidewalk like a lamppost. The road, it should be said, is technically unfinished, one of those private ways not yet accepted by the city and therefore legally dangerous, though in excellent condition and freely traveled. If the birds had intended to hold public receptions daily, as they have done without intending it, they could hardly have chosen a more convenient spot. The stump, which is about 25 feet in height, stands quite by itself in the middle of a small open space, with a wooded amphitheatrical knoll at its back, while on the other side it's overlooked by the windows of several houses, the nearest almost within stone's throw. So conspicuous is it, indeed, that whenever I go there, as I do once every 2 or 3 days, to see how matters are coming on, I'm almost sure to see the birds far in advance of my arrival. They are always there. I heard of them through the kindness of a stranger on the 26th of June. His letter reached me in Boston at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 3:30 I was admiring the birds. It cannot be said that they welcomed my attentions. From that day to this, they have treated me as an intruder. You have stayed long enough. We are not at home today. Come now, old inquisitive, go about your business. Things like these they repeat to me by the half hour. Then, in audible asides, they confide to each other what they think of me. Watch him, says one at last. I must be off now after a few grubs. And away she goes, while her mate continues to inform me that I am a busybody, a meddler in other birds' affairs, a common nuisance, a duffer, and everything else that is disreputable. All this is unpleasant. I feel as I imagine a baseball umpire feels when the players call him a gump, and the crowd yells robber. But, like the umpire, I bear it meekly and hold my ground. A good conscience is a strong support. In sober truth, I have been scrupulously careful of the birds' feelings, or if not of their feelings, at least of their safety. I began, indeed, by being almost ludicrously careful. The nest was a precious secret, I thought. I must guard it as a miser guards his treasure. So, whenever a foot passenger happened along the highway at my back, I made pretense of being concerned with anything in the world rather than with that lamp-post of a stump. What was Hecuba to me, or I to Hecuba? I pretty soon learned, however, that such precautions were unnecessary. The whole town, or at least the whole neighborhood, was aware of the birds' presence. Every schoolteacher in the city, one man told me, had been there with his or her pupils to see them. So popular is ornithology in these modern days. He had seen 30 or 40 persons about the place at once, he said, all in the same errand. Look at that bank there, he added. They have worn it smooth by sitting on it. I have not been fortunate enough to assist at any such interesting function, but I have had plenty of evidence to prove the truth of what I said just now, that the birds and their nest have become matters of common knowledge. On my third visit, just as I was ready to come away, a boy turned the corner on a bicycle, holding his younger sister in front of him. "Are they here?" he inquired as he dismounted. "Who?" said I. "The red-headed woodpeckers," he answered. He had known about the nest for some weeks. Oh, yes, everybody knew it. So-and-so found it, I forgot the name, and pretty soon it was all over Newtonville. A certain boy, whose wretched name also I have forgotten, had talked about shooting one of the birds. He could get $1.50 for it, he professed, but Policeman Blank had said that $1.50 wouldn't do a boy much good if he got hold of him. He, my informant, a bright-faced, manly fellow of 11 or 12, had brought his younger sister down to see the birds. He thought they were very handsome. "There," said he, as one of them perched on a dead tree nearby. "Look!" And he knelt behind the little girl and pointed over her shoulder till she got the direction. After all, I thought, a boy is almost as pretty as a woodpecker. His father and mother were Canadians, and had told him that birds of this kind were common where they used to live. Then he lifted his sister upon the wheel, jumped up behind her, and away they trundled. At another time, an older boy came along, also on a bicycle, and stopped for a minute's chat. He, too, was in the secret, and had been for a good while. Pretty nice birds, his verdict was. And at a later visit, a man with his dog suddenly appeared. "Handsome, aren't they?" he began by way of good morning. He had seen one of them as long ago as when the snow was on the ground, but he didn't discover the nest. He was looking in the wrong place. Since then, he had spent hours in watching the birds, and believed that he could tell the female's voice from the male. "There," said he, "that's the mother's call." He was acquainted with all the birds, and could name them all, he said, simply by their notes, and he told me many things about them. There were grosbeaks here. Did I know them? And tanagers also. Did I know them? And another bird that he was especially fond of, a beautiful singer, though it never sang after the early part of the season, the indigo bird its name was. Did I know that? As will readily be imagined, we had a good session. One doesn't fall in with so congenial a spirit every day of the week, though it ran a little too exclusively to questions and answers, perhaps, for I, too, am a Yankee. He was the man who told me about the throngs of sightseers that came here. The very publicity of the thing had been the bird's salvation, he was inclined to believe. The entire community had taken them under its protection, and with so many windows overlooking the place, and the police on the alert, I had noticed a placard nearby, signed by the chief, laying down the law and calling upon all good citizens to help him enforce it. It would have been hard for anybody to have meddled with the nest without coming to grief. At all events, the birds had so far escaped molestation, and the young, as I have said, would soon be on the wing. One of them was thrusting his full-grown, wide-awake, eager-looking, mouse-colored head out of the aperture as we talked. But why so much excitement over a family of woodpeckers? Some reader may be asking. Rarity, my friend, rarity and brilliant feathers. So far as appears from the latest catalogue of Massachusetts birds, this Newton nest is one of a very small number ever found in the state, and the very first one ever recorded from the eastern half of it. Put that fact with the further one that the birds are among the showiest in North America, real marvels of beauty, splendid colors splendidly laid on, and it is plain to see why a city full of nature lovers should have welcomed this pair with open arms and watched over their welfare as one watches over the most honored of guests. For my part, I should not think it inappropriate if the mayor were to order the firing of a salute and the ringing of bells on the happy morning when the young birds take wing. Tons of gunpowder have been burnt before now, with less reason. The second article is Late Summer Notes. On this bright morning I am passing fields and kitchen gardens that I have not seen since a month ago. Then the fields were newly mown stubble fields, such as all men who knew anything of the luxury of a barefooted boyhood must have in vivid remembrance. How gingerly, with what a sudden slackening of the pace, we walked over them, if circumstances made such a venture necessary, in pursuit of a lost ball, or on our way to the swimming hole, setting the foot down softly and stepping high. I can see the action at this minute, as plainly as I can see yonder fence post. Now the first thing that strikes the eye is the lively green of the aftermath. It looks as soft as a velvet carpet. I remember what I used to hear in haying time, that cattle like the second crop best. I should think they would. Grass is man's patient friend. Directly or indirectly, we may say, he subsists upon it. Nay, the Scripture itself declares as much in one of its most familiar texts. It is good to see it so quick to recover from the cruel work of the scythe, so responsive to the midsummer rains, its color so deep, its leaves so full of sap. It is this spirit of hopefulness, this patience under injury, that makes shaven lawns possible. As to the beauty of grass, no man appreciates it, I suppose, unless he has lived where grass does not grow. When I go back to New England, said an exile in Florida, I will ask for no garden. Let me have grass about the house, and I can do without roses. The century ends with an apple year, and every tree is in fashion. The old, the decrepit, the solitary, not one of them but got the word in season, as there is no woman in Christendom but learns somehow before it is too late whether sleeves are to be worn loose or tight. Along the roadside, in the swamp, in the orchard, everywhere the story is the same. Apple trees are all Freemasons. This hollow shell of a trunk, with one last battered limb keeping it alive, received its cue with the rest. In the orchard, where the trees are younger and more pliable, a man would hardly know them for the same he saw there in May and June. So altered are they in shape, so smoothly rounded at the top, so like Babylonian willows in the droop of the branches. Baldwins are turning red, greenish red, and russets are already rusty. Yes, says the owner of the orchard, and much good will it do me. Apples are an aggravating crop, he declares. First there are none, and then there are so many that you cannot sell them. Human nature is never satisfied, and, for one, I think it seldom has reason to be. A bobolink, which seems to be somewhere overhead, drops a few notes in passing. I am off, he says, sorry to go, but I know where there is a rice field. From the orchard come the voices of bluebirds and kingbirds. Not a bird is in song, and what is more melancholy, the road and the fields are thick with English sparrows. Now I stop at the smell of growing corn, which is only another kind of grass, though the farmer may not suspect the fact, and perhaps would not believe you if you told him of it, more than he would believe you if you told him that clover is not grass. He and his cow know better. A queer set these botanists, who get their notions from books. Corn or grass, here grow some acres of it, well tasseled, all tousled out, with the wind stirring the leaves to make them shine. Does the odor with which the breeze is loaded come from the blossoms or from the substance of the plant itself? A new question for me. I climb the fence and put my nose to one of the tassels. No, it is not in them, I think. It must be in the stalk and leaves, and I adopt this opinion the more readily because the odor itself, the memory of which is part of every country boy's inheritance, is like that of a vegetable rather than a flower, a smell rather than a perfume. I seem to recall that the stalk smelled just so when we cut it into lengths for cornstalk fiddles. And the nose, as everybody must have remarked, has a good memory, for the reason probably that it is so near the brain. I turn the corner and go from the garden to the wild. First, however, I must rest a few minutes under a wide branching oak opposite the site of a vanished house. You would know there had been a house here at some time, even if you did not see the cellar hole, by the old maid's pinks along the fence. How fresh they look, and how becomingly they blush. They are worthy of their name. Age cannot wither them. less handsome than carnations, if you will, but faithful, home-loving souls, not requiring to be waited upon, but given rather to waiting upon others. Like mayweed and catnip, they are what I have heard called folksy plants, though on second thought I should rather say homey. There's something of the cat about them, a kind of local constancy. They stay by the old place, let the people go where they will. Probably they would grow in front of a new house, even a Queen Anne cottage so-called, if necessity were laid upon them. But who could imagine it? It would be shameful to subject them to such indignity. They are survivors, livers in the past, lovers of things as they were, charter members, I should say, of the Society of Colonial Dames. As I come to the edge of the swamp, I see a leaf move, and by squeaking draw into sight a redstart. The pretty creature peeps at me furtively, wondering what new sort of man it can be that makes noises of that kind. To all appearances she is very desirous not to be seen. Yet she spreads her tail every few seconds so as to display its bright markings. Probably the action has grown to be habitual, and, as it were, automatic. A bird may be unconsciously coquettish, I suppose, as well as a woman or a man. It is a handsome tail, anyhow. Somewhere just behind me, a red-eyed vireo is singing in a peculiar manner, repeating its hackneyed measure with all his customary speed, 40 or 50 times a minute, but with no more than half his customary voice, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. I wish he would sing so always. It would be an easy way of increasing his popularity. Not far down the road are 3 roughly dressed men, of the genus tramp if I read the signs aright, coming toward me. And I notice with pleasure that when they reach the narrow wooden bridge over the brook, they turn aside, as by a common impulse, to lean over the rail and look down into the water. When I get there, I shall do the same thing. So will every man that comes along, unless he happens to be on his business. Running water is one of the universal parables, appealing to something primitive and ineradicable in human nature. Day and night it preaches, sermons without words. It is every man's friend. The most stolid find it good company. For that reason, largely, men love to fish. They are poets without knowing it. They have never read a line of verse since they outgrew Mother Goose. They never consciously admire a landscape. They care nothing for a picture unless it is a caricature or tells a story, but they cannot cross moving water without feeling its charm. Well, in that sense of the word, I too am a poet. The tramps and I have met and passed each other, and I am on the bridge. The current is almost imperceptible, like the passage of time, and the black water is all a tangle of cresses and other plants. Lucky bugs dart hither and thither upon its surface, quick to start and quick to stop, quick to quarrel also, like butterflies, so that 2 of them can hardly meet without a momentary set-to. Full of life, and for anything that I know, full of thought. True poets, perhaps, in ways of their own. For why should man be so narrow-minded as to assume that his way is of necessity the only one? On either side of the brook, as it winds through the swamp, are acres of the stately Joe Pye weed, or purple boneset, one of the tallest of herbs. I am beginning to think well of its color, which is something like what ladies know as crushed strawberry, if I mistake not, though I used to look upon it rather disdainfully and call it faded. The plant would be better esteemed in that regard, I dare say, if it did not so often invite comparison with the cardinal flower. I note it as one of the favorites of the milkweed butterfly. Here on the very edge of the brook is the swamp loosestrife, its curving stems all reaching for the water, set with rosy bloom. My attention is drawn to it by the humming of bees, a busy, content-producing sound. How different from the hum of the factory that I passed an hour ago, through the open windows of which I saw men hurrying over piecework, every stroke like every other, every man a machine, or part of a machine, rather, for doing one thing. I wonder whether the dreariness of the modern factory system may not have had something to do with the origin and rapid development of our 19th century breed of peripatetic thieves and beggars. Above the music of the bees, I hear, of a sudden, a louder hum. A hummingbird, I say, and turn to look at a jewel weed. Yes, the bird is there, trying the blossoms one after another. Then she drops to rest upon an alder twig, always a dead one, directly under my nose, where I see her darting out her long tongue, which flashes in the sunlight. I say she. She has a whitish throat, and is either a female or a male of the present season. Did anyone ever see a hummingbird without a thrill of pleasure? Not I. As I go on, I note, half sadly, half gladly, some tokens of waning summer, especially the first few blossoms of two of the handsomest of our blue asters, laevis and patens. Soon the dusty goldenrod will be out, and then, whatever the almanac makers may say, autumn will have come. Every dry roadside will publish the fact. The end. So let's end with a poem, kind of a famous poem. The start of fall calls for some poetry. This is Mending Wall by Robert Frost. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding, to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made. But at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves and some are so nearly balls that we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd like to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only, and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a very good week.